The stagecoach door swung open, and Evelyn Moore stepped into the Wyoming dust wearing a wedding ring that didn't fit. Behind her, two small boys clutched flour sacks stuffed with everything they owned. Across the platform stood Caleb Reed, the groom she'd married by proxy 3 weeks ago, the man the whole territory whispered about. They said he was broken, dangerous, that he'd lost something out in the mountains that couldn't be found again. She'd married him anyway, because a silent cowboy was better than the streets of St. Louis, because her boys needed walls and food, and because sometimes survival doesn't wait for love. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll discover why the quietest man in Wyoming became the one everyone underestimated. The wind carried sage and leather and the particular emptiness of a town that had given up trying. Evelyn stood on the platform with her hands pressed to her sides, aware that every eye in Sweetwater Station had turned toward her. Not curious eyes, judging ones. She'd expected Caleb to be older. The letter his sister had written, careful, measured words that revealed nothing, had made him sound like a man past his prime, looking for help more than companionship. But the figure standing 20 feet away couldn't have been more than 35. Tall, broad across the shoulders, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. He held his hat in both hands, turning the brim in slow rotations like he was counting seconds. "Mrs. Reed?" His voice was low, quiet enough that she had to step closer to hear him properly. "I'm Caleb." "Evelyn." She tried to smile, failed. "These are my sons. Thomas is 8. Jacob just turned 5. Caleb's gaze shifted to the boys, and something flickered in his expression, too quick to name. He nodded once. "The wagon's ready." That was all. No welcome, no pleasantries, no attempt to ease the strangeness of the moment. He simply turned and walked toward a weathered buckboard hitched to 2 sturdy horses. Evelyn followed, one hand on each boy's shoulder, feeling the weight of every stare, tracking her movement. A woman in a faded calico dress stood outside the mercantile, arms crossed. "That's her then," she said to the man beside her, not bothering to lower her voice. "The one who answered the advertisement. Wonder how long before she figures out what she's gotten herself into." Evelyn kept walking. She'd learned in St. Louis that responding only fed the gossip, made it grow teeth. Caleb loaded their belongings, 3 carpet bags, 1 trunk, the flour sacks, into the wagon bed with efficient, impersonal movements. He didn't offer to help her onto the seat, didn't speak to the boys, just waited until they'd all climbed aboard, then released the brake and guided the horses onto the rutted road leading out of town. The silence stretched. Thomas sat stiff beside her, trying to be brave. Jacob pressed against her other side, thumb creeping toward his mouth, before she caught his hand gently. The landscape rolled past. Endless grass, distant mountains still crowned with snow, sky so wide it made her chest ache. "How far?" she finally asked. 12 miles. Caleb didn't look at her. "We'll be there before dark." "Is the house large?" "No." She waited for more. Nothing came. The man drove the wagon like he was alone, his attention fixed on the horizon, his jaw set in a way that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. This is a mistake, Evelyn thought. I've traded one impossible situation for another. But there was no going back. She had $17 left to her name, 2 growing boys, and a reputation in St. Louis that would have kept her unemployable, even if positions existed. When she'd seen the advertisement in the Missouri Gazette, "Widower seeks wife. Must accept children. No romance expected," it had seemed like providence. A practical arrangement, mutual benefit. She hadn't expected this wall of silence, this sense that she'd married a ghost. The miles passed. Jacob fell asleep against her shoulder. Thomas watched the landscape with wide eyes, probably wondering if they'd left one kind of poverty for a worse one. Evelyn studied Caleb when she thought he wouldn't notice. The set of his shoulders, the careful way he held the reins, the scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. They said he'd been a trapper before settling here, that he'd lived alone in the mountains for years, coming into town only twice a year for supplies, that something had happened out there, something that had carved the silence into him and left him unable to connect with other human beings. She'd married him anyway. The sun was low when Caleb guided the horses off the main road onto a narrower track. Ahead, Nestled in a shallow valley with a creek running behind it stood a cabin. Not large, as he'd said. Single story, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and a porch that sagged slightly on one side. A barn and corral stood nearby, both in better repair than the house. Chickens scratched in a fenced yard. A milk cow watched their approach with patient indifference. It wasn't much, but it was more than Evelyn had expected. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch steps. "I'll get the bags." "I can help. I'll get the bags," he repeated, still not looking at her. "You'll want to see inside. Show the boys where they'll sleep." It wasn't a suggestion. Evelyn climbed down, lifting Jacob carefully, and took Thomas's hand. The cabin door wasn't locked. It swung open on leather hinges, revealing a single large room with a sleeping loft above. The interior was Spartan but clean. A cook stove stood against one wall, its surface scrubbed. A rough table with 4 mismatched chairs occupied the center. Shelves held tin plates, cups, a few books. The floor was swept. The windows, small, with real glass, let in the fading light. In the corner near the stove sat a narrow bed, neatly made. One bed. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She'd known this was coming, had tried to prepare herself, but the reality of it settled over her like cold water. "Mama?" Thomas's voice was small. "Where will we sleep?" "Up there, I think." She pointed to the loft. A ladder led up to the space beneath the peaked roof. "Let me look." The loft was low but serviceable, with 2 pallets already laid out, each with a wool blanket folded at the foot. Someone, Caleb, she assumed, had prepared this space, had thought about 2 boys needing somewhere to sleep. "It's perfect," she told Thomas, forcing brightness into her voice. "Like a fort. You'll be able to see the whole room from up here." Jacob stirred, blinking awake. "I'm hungry." "I know, sweet. We'll make supper soon." Behind her, the door opened. Caleb entered carrying the trunk on one shoulder, 2 carpet bags in his other hand. He set them down near the bed without ceremony, then went back outside. Returned with the flour sacks. Placed them beside the others. "There's salt pork in the larder," he said, still not meeting her eyes. "Potatoes in the root cellar out back. Coffee's on the shelf." "Thank you." Evelyn kept her voice even. "I'll start something." He nodded. Started toward the door. "Caleb?" He stopped, hand on the frame. "Where will you sleep?" For the first time he looked directly at her. His eyes were gray, she realized, the color of storm clouds. "Barn's fine." "You don't need to—" "Barn's fine," he repeated, and walked out. Through the window, Evelyn watched him unhitch the horses, lead them toward the corral. His movements were practiced, efficient, a man who'd learned to do everything alone and had never unlearned it. Thomas climbed the ladder to the loft, exploring. Jacob tugged at her skirt. "Mama, I really am hungry." "I know, darling. I'll fix something right now." She found the salt pork, sliced it thin, and set it frying in a cast-iron pan. Located potatoes in the root cellar, a deep hole behind the cabin with a wooden cover, and scrubbed them clean. Made coffee in a battered pot. Set the table with the tin plates. By the time Caleb came back inside, the food was ready. He washed his hands at the basin, dried them on a towel that had seen better days, and sat at the table without speaking. Evelyn served him first, then the boys, then herself. They ate in silence. Jacob struggled with his pork. It was tough, needed longer cooking, and Evelyn cut it smaller without drawing attention. Thomas ate mechanically, exhaustion written in every line of his small body. Caleb cleaned his plate, drank his coffee in 3 long swallows, and stood. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything." "Caleb, wait." Evelyn stood as well. "We should talk about arrangements, expectations." He went very still. "What do you need to know?" "Everything." She kept her voice steady. "I don't know what you expect from this marriage, what my duties are, how you want things done. Cook, clean, take care of the house, that's all." "That's all?" "That's all. And the boys, they can help with chores when they're ready. No need to rush it." He moved toward the door again. "You take the bed. I'll stay in the barn." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." "For what?" But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. Evelyn stood in the silent cabin, surrounded by someone else's things, married to a stranger who couldn't bear to sleep under the same roof. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. She looked at her sons, Thomas watching her carefully, Jacob already drooping with sleep, and made herself smile. "Let's get you both cleaned up and into bed. Tomorrow will be better." She didn't know if that was true, but she said it anyway because that's what mothers did. The days fell into a pattern. Evelyn woke before dawn to start the fire, make coffee, and prepare breakfast. Caleb came in from the barn at first light, ate without speaking, and went out to work. She spent the mornings cleaning, organizing, learning where everything was kept. The afternoon she devoted to washing, mending, cooking. The boys explored cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they realized the land around the cabin was safe. Caleb kept his distance. He worked alone, repairing fences, tending the animals, clearing brush. When he came in for meals, he was polite, silent, and quick. He never sat longer than necessary, never asked questions about her day, never offered information about his own. But Evelyn noticed things. She noticed that the firewood was always stacked exactly high enough for her to reach without straining, that when Thomas's boot sole came loose, a new pair appeared on the porch the next morning. Not new exactly, but well-made and the right size. That Caleb positioned himself between the boys and the horses whenever they came near the corral, casual about it, but unmistakably protective. She noticed the book on his shelf, Paradise Lost, its pages soft with reading. The careful way he cleaned his rifle every night. The garden plot behind the cabin, already turned and ready for planting. She noticed he never complained, never raised his voice, never showed impatience. But she also noticed he never smiled, never relaxed, moved through each day like a man fulfilling an obligation he'd rather not have accepted. On the fourth night, as she cleared the supper dishes, Evelyn made a decision. "Caleb," she said before he could escape to the barn, "sit down, please." He hesitated, then lowered himself back into the chair. His hands rested flat on the table, fingers spread, waiting. "This isn't working," Evelyn said quietly. Thomas and Jacob were in the loft, playing with wooden horses Caleb had carved and left on the porch without explanation. "We can't live like strangers forever." "What do you want from me?" "Conversation. Acknowledgement that we're sharing a life, even if it's not the life either of us would have chosen." She sat across from him. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but it's what we both agreed to. I'm keeping my end of the bargain. I'm not talking about duties, Caleb. I'm talking about being human beings in the same house." His jaw tightened. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "People." The admission cost him. She could see it in the tension that ran through his shoulders, the way his fingers curled slightly against the table. Evelyn softened her voice. "Neither am I anymore. But we have to try." She paused. "The boys are afraid of you, not because you're cruel, you've been nothing but kind in your way, but because you're a wall. They don't know how to reach you." "Maybe that's better." "It's not. You don't know." He stopped, shook his head. "You don't know what you're asking." "Then tell me." For a long moment she thought he wouldn't, thought he'd stand and walk away like he always did, but something in his expression shifted, resignation, maybe, or exhaustion. "I had a family," he said finally, "a long time ago, out in the mountains. A wife, a daughter." Evelyn's breath caught. "What happened?" "Winter came early, sickness with it. I couldn't—" His voice went rough. "I couldn't save them. Caleb, I buried them under the snow because the ground was too frozen for anything else. Walked away and didn't come back." He met her eyes, and what she saw there was bottomless. "I'm not good at this because I already failed at it once. And I won't do that again." The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn understood suddenly why he slept in the barn, why he kept his distance, why every kindness came without attachment. He was protecting himself, protecting them. "Caleb," she said gently, "we're not asking you to replace them. No one could. But Jacob and Thomas need a father, and I need a partner. Not a ghost who lives in the barn and feels nothing. It's safer this way." For who? She reached across the table slowly and placed her hand over his. He went rigid. Safe isn't the same as alive. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then, carefully, he withdrew his hand and stood. "I'll think about it," he said, and walked out into the night. The change was small at first. Caleb began eating breakfast with them instead of taking his plate outside. He didn't talk much, but he listened when Thomas chattered about finding a bird's nest, or Jacob announced he'd counted 23 chickens. He answered when spoken to, short answers, but answers. He started coming in earlier in the evenings, helping Evelyn carry water from the creek, splitting kindling for the morning fire. Once, when she burned her hand on the stove, he brought her a tin of salve from the barn without being asked. "My wife made it," he said, setting it on the table. "From comfrey and beeswax. It's old, but it still works." Evelyn stared at the tin, at the careful way he avoided looking at it. "Thank you." He nodded and left. But that night, he didn't go to the barn. Instead, he spread his bedroll on the floor near the stove, far enough from her bed to be respectable, close enough to be present. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," Evelyn said. "I know." He settled onto the bedroll, folded his arms behind his head. "But I'm tired of the barn." It was the closest he'd come to admitting he wanted to be there. Evelyn smiled in the darkness. "Good night, Caleb." "Night." The days grew longer. Spring settled over the valley in earnest, bringing green grass and wildflowers and the first warm winds. Evelyn planted the garden, beans, squash, carrots, lettuce. Caleb built a better fence around it without being asked. Thomas learned to gather eggs. Jacob followed Caleb everywhere, asking endless questions that Caleb answered with increasing patience. One afternoon, Evelyn found them in the barn together. Caleb was showing Jacob how to brush the horses, his large hands guiding the boy's smaller ones. "Like this," Caleb said, demonstrating the stroke. "Gentle, but firm. They like it." Jacob mimicked the motion, face serious with concentration. "Does she have a name?" "Josie." "That's pretty." "It was my daughter's name." The words were quiet, almost lost in the rustle of straw and the horse's contented breathing. But Evelyn heard them, saw the way Jacob looked up at Caleb with complete trust. "I bet she was nice," Jacob said. "She was." Caleb's voice was steady. "Very nice." Evelyn backed away before either of them noticed her, went to the cabin and sat at the table, pressing her hands over her mouth. Something was shifting. Something fragile and essential was beginning to build in the spaces between them. That night, after the boys were asleep, Caleb sat on the porch steps watching the stars. Evelyn brought him coffee and sat beside him. "You're good with them," she said. "They're good boys. Thomas asked me today if we were going to stay here forever." "What did you tell him?" "I said yes, that this is home now." She sipped her coffee. "Was I wrong?" Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then, "No, you weren't wrong." Something in her chest loosened. "I saw you with Jacob today, in the barn. He asks a lot of questions. He likes you. He's 5. He doesn't know better." "Caleb." She waited until he looked at her. "You're allowed to care about them, about us. It's not a betrayal." His throat worked. "It feels like one." "I know." And she did. She knew about guilt, about the weight of loss, about the fear that anything good would be taken away. "But we're still here, and we're not going anywhere." He looked away, jaw tight. But he didn't argue, didn't retreat. They sat together in the darkness, drinking coffee, listening to the night sounds. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Evelyn felt like maybe, just maybe, they were building something that might last. The trouble started on a Wednesday. Evelyn had taken the wagon into Sweetwater to buy supplies, flour, salt, fabric for shirts the boys were growing out of. Caleb had offered to go instead, but she'd insisted. She needed to establish herself, needed people to see she wasn't hiding. The mercantile was busy. Women clustered near the fabric counter, voices low but carrying. Evelyn ignored them, gathering what she needed, counting her money carefully. Evelyn Reed. The voice belonged to Margaret Hastings, wife of the bank manager. How domestic you've become. Evelyn turned. Mrs. Hastings. We were just discussing the church social next month. You'll attend, of course, with your husband. The way she said husband carried weight. People are curious about the two of you. We keep to ourselves. Yes, you do. Very wise, given the circumstances. Margaret smiled. Though one wonders how long that can last. A woman alone with a man like Caleb Reed. People talk. Let them. Oh, they will. They already are. She leaned closer. Everyone knows why you're really here. A desperate woman with 2 hungry children and a past she couldn't outrun. Caleb needed a housekeeper and you needed walls. It's practical, not proper. Heat flooded Evelyn's face. My marriage is legal and none of your concern. Of course it is. We just find it interesting that a man who couldn't stand human company for 10 years suddenly marries a woman he'd never met. Margaret's eyes glittered. What changed, I wonder? And how long before one of you realizes you've made a terrible mistake? Evelyn set the flower on the counter with controlled force. I need to finish my shopping. Certainly. Do give Caleb our regards. Tell him we hope he's not making the same mistake twice. The words landed like a slap. Evelyn paid for her supplies, loaded the wagon, and drove home with her hands shaking. Caleb was in the corral when she arrived, working with a young horse. He looked up, started toward her, then stopped. Something in her expression must have warned him. What happened? Nothing. She climbed down, began unloading. Just small-town gossip. Evelyn, she turned on him. They say we're not a real marriage, that I'm using you, that you're making the same mistake you made before, that we're fooling ourselves if we think this can work. The words tumbled out, sharp with anger and hurt. Is that what they say to you when you go to town? Caleb's face went hard. I don't listen. Well, I have to, because unlike you, I can't just ignore people. I need to buy supplies, take the boys to church when we finally build up the courage. And every time I do, they'll be watching, judging, waiting for us to fail. So let them. It's not that simple. It is. He took the flour sack from her hands, set it in the wagon bed. You think I don't know what they say? That they didn't try to warn me before you came? That I'm making a mistake? Opening myself up to loss again? Trusting someone I don't know? His voice was rough but steady. I married you anyway. Not because I needed a housekeeper, because I needed... He stopped. Looked away. What? Evelyn's anger drained away. What did you need? A reason, he said quietly. To stop living like I was already dead. The admission hung between them. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Caleb? They can say whatever they want, he continued, but this, us, the boys, this life, it's real. It matters. And I'm not giving it up because some people can't understand why. He picked up the rest of the supplies and carried them inside, leaving Evelyn standing beside the wagon, her heart beating too fast. That night, he didn't sleep on the floor. He asked first, stood beside the bed with his bedroll in hand, and said, If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to sleep here. Just sleep. Nothing more. Evelyn pulled back the quilt. Yes. He lay down on the far edge, careful to leave space between them. But he was there, present, real. Evelyn stared at the ceiling, acutely aware of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body, the scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to him. This man who'd lost everything, who'd buried his family in the snow and walked away from the mountains because staying would have killed him, who'd built walls so high nothing could get through, and who was slowly, carefully letting those walls crack. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For choosing us. In the darkness, his hand found hers, their fingers interlaced. Every day, he said. I'm choosing you every day. Outside, the wind sang through the valley. Inside, something fragile became something stronger. And in the loft above, 2 boys slept soundly, wrapped in wool blankets in the beginning of safety. The morning came soft and golden, light filtering through the cabin windows in dusty streams. Evelyn woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the stove with coffee brewing. He'd folded his side of the quilt with precise corners, but the indentation of his body remained in the mattress beside her. Morning, he said without turning around. Good morning. She sat up, smoothing her braid. You didn't have to start the fire. Old habit. He poured 2 cups, brought one to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it. Sleep well? I did. Better than she had in months, actually. Something about his presence, solid, steady, had quieted the anxious voices that usually kept her half awake. You? Well enough. It was a small conversation, unremarkable to anyone listening, but for them it felt monumental. A morning greeting, coffee shared, the ordinary intimacy of 2 people learning to occupy the same space. Thomas appeared at the top of the ladder, hair standing in all directions. Is it breakfast time? Soon, Evelyn said. Wake your brother and wash up. The day unfolded like the ones before it, but different in subtle ways. Caleb lingered over breakfast, telling Thomas about a hawk's nest he'd spotted near the north fence. Jacob announced he wanted to help with the horses, and Caleb agreed without hesitation. When Evelyn went to hang laundry, she found that someone had already strung a new line between 2 posts, higher than the old one, easier to reach. Small things. Quiet things. The kind of gestures that built a foundation without fanfare. By afternoon, the sky had turned heavy with clouds. Caleb came in early, glanced at the darkening horizon. Storm coming. Big one, from the look of it. Should I bring things inside? Already did. Chickens are secured, cows in the barn. He checked the windows, made sure the shutters were ready. Might lose some shingles if the wind picks up. I'll check the roof after it passes. The storm hit just before supper, a wall of wind and rain that turned the world gray. Thunder rolled across the valley like distant artillery. Jacob pressed against Evelyn's side, eyes wide. Thomas tried to look brave but flinched at each lightning strike. It's all right, Caleb said, settling into his chair with a calmness that seemed to fill the room. Cabin's solid. We're safe here. How do you know? Jacob asked, voice small. Because I built half of it myself. Reinforced the beams, sealed every crack. He gestured to the walls. This place has weathered worse storms than this. It'll hold. The certainty in his voice worked like magic. Both boys relaxed visibly. Evelyn felt her own tension ease. There was something profoundly reassuring about Caleb's competence, his unshakable belief in the things he'd built with his own hands. They ate by lamplight while rain hammered the roof. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin felt like a refuge, warm, dry, secure. After supper, Caleb surprised them all by pulling the battered copy of Paradise Lost from the shelf. You read? Thomas asked, clearly amazed. Sometimes. Caleb opened the book, pages falling to a familiar spot. My wife taught me. Said a man should know more than how to shoot and trap. It was the first time he'd mentioned her without pain tightening his voice. Evelyn watched him settle into the chair, the book resting easy in his scarred hands. Would you read to us? She asked quietly. He looked uncertain. It's not exactly a cheerful story. We don't need cheerful, we just need something. So he read. His voice was rough at first, unpracticed, but it settled into a rhythm as the words took hold. Milton's language filled the cabin, grand, dense, beautiful. The boys didn't understand half of it, but they listened anyway, captivated by the sound of Caleb's voice giving shape to something larger than their small world. When he finished the passage, Jacob was asleep against Evelyn's shoulder. Thomas was nodding off. The storm had gentled to steady rain. That was beautiful, Evelyn said. Caleb closed the book carefully. She used to read it to our daughter, even when she was too young to understand. Said it didn't matter, that beautiful words were worth hearing regardless. She sounds wise. She was. He set the book aside. I haven't opened that in years, thought it would hurt too much. Did it? Not as much as I expected. He looked at her directly, that gray gaze steady. Things hurt less now, since you came. The words settled between them, simple and profound. Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest, not the sharp heat of new attraction, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The sense that they were both emerging from long winters into uncertain spring. Help me get the boys to bed, she said softly. Together they carried the sleeping children to the loft, tucked them under blankets, smoothed hair from foreheads. Caleb's hand lingered on Jacob's shoulder for just a moment before he pulled away. Downstairs, the cabin felt intimate in the lamplight. Rain continued its soft percussion on the roof. Evelyn banked the fire while Caleb checked the door, the windows, the familiar rituals of securing a home for the night. When they finally lay down, together now, without discussion or hesitation, Evelyn felt the day's tensions drain away. Caleb's breathing deepened beside her. His hand found hers in the darkness. "Evelyn?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you're here." She smiled against the pillow. "So am I." Outside, the storm moved east, leaving the valley washed clean and quiet. Inside, two people who'd married as strangers fell asleep holding hands, building trust in increments too small to name but too real to dismiss. The morning brought crystalline air and a world scrubbed bright. Caleb was on the roof before breakfast, replacing 3 shingles that had blown loose. Evelyn worked in the garden, pulling weeds, checking the seedlings that were just beginning to break through the soil. Thomas helped Jacob gather eggs, both boys chattering about the storm like they'd survived a great adventure. It felt for the first time like a family. The feeling lasted until mid-morning when a rider appeared on the road from town. Evelyn straightened, shading her eyes. Caleb climbed down from the roof, wiped his hands on his pants. They both watched as the horse drew closer, a fine bay gelding carrying a man in a suit too clean for ranch country. "Expecting someone?" Caleb asked. "No." The rider stopped at the edge of the yard, dismounted with the careful movements of someone unused to horses. He was perhaps 40, with thinning hair and a soft face that suggested indoor work and regular meals. "Mr. Reed?" His voice carried the clipped tones of the East Coast. "I'm looking for Caleb Reed." "You found him." Caleb's posture had shifted, not threatening, but watchful. "What's your business?" "My name is Howard Winters. I'm an attorney from Cheyenne." He pulled a leather case from his saddlebag. "I have documents that require your signature, regarding property rights and a legal matter that's been pending for some time." Evelyn moved closer to Caleb. Something in the attorney's manner set her nerves on edge. Too smooth, too practiced. "I don't have any legal matters," Caleb said flatly. "Actually, you do. It concerns the land your previous homestead occupied, the property in the Medicine Bow Range where you lived before relocating here." Winters smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "There's been a dispute about mineral rights. The railroad is interested in building through that territory, and certain parties have claimed your abandonment of the property nullified your claim." Caleb went very still. "That land is filed and registered." "Was filed. But according to territorial law, continuous occupation is required to maintain a claim. You haven't set foot there in 10 years. "I had cause." "I'm sure you did. But the law doesn't account for personal tragedy, Mr. Reed. It accounts for presence and use." Winters opened his case, withdrew papers. "However, I'm not here to dispute your claim. I'm here to offer you a settlement. The railroad is willing to pay a fair price for the rights to build through your former property. $500. The sum hung in the air. It was more money than most men in the territory saw in 5 years. But Evelyn watched Caleb's face and saw only stone. "That land isn't for sale." "Mr. Reed, be reasonable. You're not using it. You've built a life here. $500 could improve this property considerably. New barn, better equipment, security for your family." His gaze slid to Evelyn. "Your new family?" "The answer is no. I should mention that if you refuse the settlement, the railroad will pursue the legal argument that you've abandoned the claim. They have considerable resources and excellent lawyers. You could lose everything and receive nothing." "Then I'll lose it." Caleb's voice was quiet but absolute. "But I won't sell." Winters sighed, tucking the papers away. "You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first. Think about it at least. I'll be in Sweetwater for 3 more days, staying at the hotel. If you change your mind—" "I won't." The attorney mounted his horse with visible frustration. "Good day, Mr. Reed, Mrs. Reed." He tipped his hat and rode off, leaving dust and tension in his wake. Evelyn waited until he was out of earshot. "Caleb, $500? "No." He turned toward the barn, shoulders rigid. "Just listen." "I said no." "Why?" She followed him. "That money could change everything for us. The boys need clothes, supplies, we could expand the herd. I'm not selling that land." He grabbed a shovel, gripped it hard enough his knuckles went white. I can't. Because of what happened there? Because they're still there. His voice cracked. I buried them in that valley, Evelyn, under a pine tree I planted when my daughter was born. That's their ground, sacred ground, and I won't let some railroad tear through it like it's nothing. Understanding crashed over her. Oh, Caleb. I know it's not rational. I know they're gone and it's just dirt and stone, but it's all I have left of them, the only place they still exist. He set the shovel down, pressed both hands against the barn wall. I can't sell that. I can't. Evelyn stepped closer, placed her hand on his back, felt the tremor running through him. Then we won't, she said firmly. We'll find another way. The railroad can go around, or through someone else's land, but they can't have yours. She moved to stand in front of him, waiting until he met her eyes. That's your family's resting place. No amount of money is worth disturbing that. Relief and gratitude flooded his expression. He pulled her close, the first time he'd truly embraced her, and she wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. You don't have to thank me for basic decency. Yes, I do, because you understand. You're not trying to convince me I'm wrong. You're not wrong. Some things aren't for sale. They stood together in the barn, holding each other while the horses shifted in their stalls and dust motes danced in the light. And Evelyn realized that this fierce protection of what mattered, this willingness to stand against the world for the sake of the dead, was exactly the kind of man Caleb Reed was. The kind of man who would fight for what he loved, even when love cost everything. That evening, after the boys were asleep, they sat at the table with coffee and the weight of decisions ahead of them. They won't give up, Caleb said. Railroad wants what it wants. Winners was just the first move. What can they actually do? Challenge the claim in court. Argue abandonment. They'll have lawyers, documentation, probably witnesses willing to say I haven't maintained the property. He stared into his cup. And they'll be right. I haven't been back. Can't prove continuous use. Is there any way to fight it? I could go back, establish presence again, live there long enough to prove the claim is still active. For how long? Months at least, maybe longer. He looked up. But I can't leave you and the boys here alone, not for that long. Then we go with you. Evelyn, no. It's wilderness up there. No town, no neighbors, nothing but mountains and snow and... He stopped. And ghosts. We've survived worse than ghosts. You don't understand. That cabin, I haven't set foot in it since the day I buried them. Everything is still there. Her clothes, the cradle I built, all of it frozen in time. His hands tightened around the cup. I can't go back there. Then let it go. I can't do that either. They sat in silence, trapped between impossible choices. Evelyn thought about the attorney's smooth face, his certainty that money could buy anything. Thought about the railroad pushing through, indifferent to the graves in its path. Thought about Caleb, bound by grief to a place he couldn't bear to see again. There has to be another way, she said finally. Something we're not seeing. If there is, I don't know what it is. Then we'll figure it out. Together. He met her eyes across the table. You really mean that? I do. This is our life now, Caleb. Your past, my past. It's all part of what we're building. We face it together or we don't face it at all. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly, but recognition. The understanding that he wasn't alone anymore. That the walls he'd built to protect himself had become a prison, and she was offering him a way out. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. That's not for you to decide. I'm here, and I'm staying, and whatever comes next, we'll handle it. She reached across the table, took his hand. But Caleb, you need to tell me everything. About that place, about what happened, about what we're really fighting for. He was quiet for a long time. Then slowly, he began to talk. He told her about the cabin in the Medicine Bow Range, tucked into a valley so remote it felt like the edge of the world. About the woman he'd met at a trading post, a Shoshone woman named Ayanna, who'd taught him her language and he'd taught her English. About falling in love in a place where civilization's rules didn't reach, building a life that was simple and hard and entirely theirs. He told her about their daughter, born during a spring snowstorm, strong and beautiful and perfect. About 3 years of happiness so complete it felt like a gift he didn't deserve. And then he told her about the winter that took it all away. The fever that came with the first snow, burning through both of them while he stayed helpless and healthy. The desperate ride to the nearest settlement, only to be turned away because no white doctor would treat an Indian woman. The long, cold ride back to find his daughter already gone, his wife slipping away. "I held her while she died," he said, voice raw. "Told her I'd take care of our girl, that I'd bury them together, that I'd never leave them alone. And then I broke every one of those promises. You buried them and ran, left them in that valley and never looked back, never visited, never honored them the way they deserved." He pulled his hand away, scrubbed it over his face. "I'm not fighting the railroad because of money or principle. I'm fighting because if I let them build through there, it means I abandoned them twice. And I won't do that again." Evelyn absorbed it all, the love, the loss, the crushing weight of guilt he'd carried for a decade. No wonder he'd hidden in silence. No wonder he'd built walls so high nothing could penetrate them. "You didn't abandon them," she said firmly. "You survived. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Because you're still here, still breathing, still living, still trying to build something good out of the ashes." She stood, moved around the table, took his face in her hands. "And they would want that, Caleb. Your wife, your daughter, they would want you to live. Not just exist, but truly live. You can't know that. I can, because I know what it's like to love someone that much. And real love doesn't demand eternal grief. It demands that you honor the life they gave you by actually living it." His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I don't know how." "Then I'll teach you, the same way you're teaching me to trust again. To believe that not every man is like my ex-husband, that not every promise will be broken." She pressed her forehead to his. "We're both learning, Caleb. Both figuring out how to be whole again, and maybe that's exactly why we found each other." He pulled her close, buried his face in her shoulder. She held him while he shook with silent tears, giving him the space to grieve without shame, without walls, without the terrible isolation that had defined him for so long. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clear. "What do we do?" he asked. "We go to Sweetwater tomorrow. Talk to a real lawyer, not one hired by the railroad. Find out what our options actually are." She wiped his cheek with her thumb. "And if we have to go back to that valley, we go together. All of us. And we'll face whatever's there as a family. The boys are stronger than you think, and they deserve to know where they come from, who you really are." She smiled gently. "Besides, running from the past never works. It just follows you. Better to turn around and face it head on." Caleb let out a long breath. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's terrifying. But it's necessary." She squeezed his hands. "And I'll be right beside you, every step." For the first time since the attorney had ridden up that morning, Caleb's expression softened. "I believe you." "Good, because I mean it." They stayed up late, making plans and drinking coffee until it went cold. By the time they finally went to bed, the path forward was still uncertain, but at least they were walking it together. Caleb held her close that night, not out of passion, but need. The need to feel connected, anchored, real. Evelyn wrapped herself around him, offering comfort without demands, presence without pressure. And in the darkness, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the sleeping cabin, they both felt something shift, something that had been frozen beginning to thaw, something broken beginning to mend. It wasn't love yet, but it was the foundation love could build on: trust, honesty, the willingness to stand together when everything else fell apart. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. Inside, two people who'd lost everything began to believe they might build something worth keeping. The road to Sweetwater the next morning was rutted and rough, but the sky was clear and the air carried the green scent of spring growth. Thomas and Jacob rode in the wagon bed, watching the landscape roll past with the easy adaptability of children. Evelyn sat beside Caleb on the driving seat, their shoulders touching with every jostle. "Nervous?" she asked quietly. "Yes." "Me too." He glanced at her, something almost like amusement in his eyes. You don't show it. Years of practice. When you're a woman alone with 2 children, showing fear is dangerous. She adjusted her bonnet. But I am. Afraid we won't find help. Afraid the railroad will win. Afraid of what it'll mean if we have to go back to that valley. We don't have to. We do. And you know it. She met his gaze steadily. But we'll survive it, Caleb. Whatever happens, we'll survive it together. His hand found hers, squeezed once. Together. Sweetwater came into view around mid-morning, the same dusty collection of buildings, the same watchful eyes tracking their arrival. But this time, Evelyn didn't flinch from the stairs. She held her head high, one hand on Caleb's arm, claiming her place beside him for anyone who cared to look. They found the lawyer's office on the main street, a narrow building sandwiched between the land office and a boarding house. The sign read Samuel Brennan, attorney at law. Caleb tied off the horses, helped the boys down. Stay close, he told them. Don't wander. Inside, the office smelled of paper and tobacco. An older man sat behind a cluttered desk, spectacles perched on his nose, reading through a thick document. He looked up as they entered. Help you? I need legal advice, Caleb said, about a land claim and railroad rights. Brennan set down the document, studied them both. You're Reed, the one who married the widow from St. Louis. I am. And this is about your old property up in the Medicine Bow Range. It wasn't a question. Howard Winters has been talking, making it known he's trying to secure that land for the Union Pacific. Can he? Legally? Maybe. Depends on how the claim was filed, how long you've been gone, whether you can prove ongoing interest in the property. Brennan gestured to the chairs. Sit. This'll take a while. They spent the next hour going through details, dates, documents, the specifics of territorial law. Brennan asked hard questions, took notes in cramped handwriting, occasionally shook his head. Finally, he sat back. Here's the truth. Your claim is vulnerable. 10 years of absence, no improvements, no taxes paid. Winters has grounds to argue abandonment. The railroad has money and influence. If they push this to court, you'll likely lose. Evelyn's heart sank. Beside her, Caleb's jaw tightened. However, Brennan continued, there's an exception in the law for claims associated with burial grounds. If you can prove the land contains graves of family members and that you've maintained it as sacred ground, the claim becomes harder to contest. I haven't maintained it, Caleb said. I haven't been back. But you could go back, establish presence, document the graves, show ongoing care and intention to preserve the site. Brennan tapped his pen against the desk. It's not a guarantee, but it's your best shot. Spend a few months there, make improvements, pay back taxes, and the railroad's case gets a lot weaker. A few months, Evelyn repeated. In the middle of nowhere. It's not easy, I know, but if you want to protect that land, it's what you'll need to do. They left the office with more questions than answers, but at least they had a path forward. As they walked back to the wagon, Evelyn felt the weight of the decision settling over them. We could just let it go, Caleb said quietly. Take the money. Build a better life here. Is that what you want? He stopped, looked back toward the mountains barely visible on the horizon. No, but I don't want to ask you to give up everything for a fight that might not matter to anyone but me. It matters to me. She touched his arm. Because it matters to you. Because those graves deserve protection, and because if we run from this, we'll always wonder if we should have fought. Thomas tugged at Caleb's sleeve. Are we going on an adventure? Caleb looked down at the boy, then at Jacob watching with wide eyes, then at Evelyn standing steady and certain beside him. Yeah, he said finally. I think we are. Will there be bears? Jacob asked, excited. Probably. Can I bring my wooden horses? You can bring whatever you want. The boys cheered, already imagining wilderness adventures. Evelyn and Caleb exchanged a look over their heads, equal parts terror and determination. When do we leave? She asked. Soon as we can pack and prepare, before Winters and the railroad make their next move. He helped her into the wagon. This is going to be hard, Evelyn. Harder than anything we've faced so far. I know. There's no guarantee it'll work. I know that too. But you're still willing? She smiled, took his hand. I told you before, we face it together or not at all. So yes, Caleb Reed, I'm still willing. Now let's go home and start packing. He climbed up beside her, gathered the reins. As they pulled out of Sweetwater, Evelyn looked back once at the town that had judged them, dismissed them, expected them to fail. They were about to prove everyone wrong. The preparation took 3 days. 3 days of sorting, packing, deciding what was essential and what could be left behind. Evelyn worked methodically, folding clothes into crates, wrapping dishes in cloth, making lists of supplies they'd need for months in the wilderness. Caleb reinforced the wagon, built a canvas cover to protect their belongings from weather, and spent long hours in the barn preparing equipment they hadn't used in years. On the second day, Margaret Hastings appeared at the property line, watching them load the wagon with undisguised curiosity. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Reed?" she called out. Evelyn straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. "We are." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." "People are saying Caleb's running again, that the railroad scared him off." Margaret's smile was sharp. "That he's dragging you and those poor boys into the wilderness because he can't face civilized society." "People say a lot of things," Evelyn replied evenly. "Most of it's nonsense." "Is it? Because it seems to me that a real man would stand and fight, not run to the mountains like a coward." Caleb appeared around the side of the wagon, a coil of rope over his shoulder. His expression was calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "A real man protects what matters," he said quietly, "even when small-minded people don't understand why." Margaret's face flushed. "I'm just concerned for Mrs. Reed and the children. Taking them into that wilderness? It's reckless, irresponsible. What's irresponsible is standing here gossiping instead of minding your own affairs." Evelyn stepped forward, putting herself between Margaret and Caleb. "We know what we're doing, and frankly, it's none of your concern. Don't say I didn't warn you when it all falls apart." "Noted." Evelyn turned her back, dismissing her. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." Margaret left in a huff, her skirts kicking up dust. Caleb watched her go, then looked at Evelyn with something like admiration. "You didn't have to defend me." "Yes, I did. She was out of line." Evelyn picked up another crate. "Besides, I meant what I said. We know what we're doing." "Do we?" She paused, met his eyes. "We know why we're doing it. That's enough." That night, after the boys were asleep, they sat on the porch one last time before leaving. The valley spread before them, dark and peaceful under a sky thick with stars. Evelyn leaned against Caleb's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Terrified." "Of what?" "Going back. Seeing that cabin again. Remembering everything I've tried to forget." He was quiet for a moment. "And afraid of what it'll do to you and the boys. That place, it changed me. Broke something inside me. What if it does the same to you?" "It won't." "You can't know that." "I can. Because we're not going there to hide or run away. We're going to face it, claim it, make it ours." She lifted her head to look at him. "And whatever ghosts are waiting there, we'll face them together. That makes all the difference." He kissed her forehead, a gentle, grateful gesture that spoke of trust slowly building. "When did you get so brave?" "The day I stepped off that stagecoach and decided to stop being afraid of living." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow they would leave this valley, this cabin that had become their first real home together. But tonight they held on to the peace, storing it up like provisions for the journey ahead. The morning came too quickly. They loaded the last of their supplies as the sun broke over the eastern ridge. Food, tools, bedding, everything they'd need to survive in country that offered no second chances. Caleb hitched the horses with practiced efficiency while Evelyn did a final check of the cabin, making sure the stove was cold, the windows secured, the door properly locked. Thomas and Jacob were nearly vibrating with excitement, treating the whole thing like a grand adventure. They didn't understand the gravity of what they were facing, and Evelyn was grateful for that. Let them have their innocence a little longer. "Ready?" Caleb asked, offering his hand to help her onto the wagon seat. "Ready." They rolled out as the sun climbed higher, the cabin growing smaller behind them until it disappeared entirely. The road north was less traveled than the route to Sweetwater, rough, narrow, winding through country that grew wilder with every mile. They passed abandoned homesteads, weathered fence posts marking failed dreams, the scattered bones of cattle that hadn't survived a hard winter. By afternoon, they'd left all signs of civilization behind. The land rose steadily, grass giving way to scrub pine and juniper, the air growing thinner and cooler. The boys' excitement gradually settled into quiet watchfulness as the wilderness closed around them. They made camp that first night beside a clear stream, the water so cold it made their teeth ache. Caleb built a fire while Evelyn prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. The boys gathered firewood, their voices echoing in the vast silence. "How much farther?" Thomas asked as they ate. 3 more days, Caleb said. "Maybe 4, depending on weather." "Will the cabin be nice?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "It's small, basic, built for surviving, not comfort." "Is that where your other family lived?" The question was innocent, curious. Jacob looked up from his beans. "The ones who died?" Evelyn started to intervene, but Caleb held up a hand. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's where they lived, where we were happy for a while." "Do you miss them?" "Every day." "But you have us now." Jacob stated it as simple fact. "So you're not alone anymore." Something cracked in Caleb's expression, pain and gratitude mixed together. "No, I'm not alone anymore." Thomas studied him seriously. "We won't die, will we? Like they did?" "Not if I can help it." Caleb met the boy's eyes. "I'll keep you safe, Thomas. All of you. I promise." "Okay." Thomas accepted this without question, the complete trust of a child who'd found something stable to hold on to. "Then I'm not scared." That night, lying under the stars with the fire crackling nearby and the boys rolled in blankets close by, Evelyn whispered to Caleb in the darkness, "You're good with them." "I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do any of us. But you show up. You answer their questions honestly. You make them feel safe." She found his hand, laced their fingers together. "That's all they need." "It doesn't feel like enough." "It's more than enough, trust me." The second day brought them into real mountain country. Steep climbs, narrow passes, views that stretched for miles. The wagon groaned over rough terrain, and twice Caleb had to get out and guide the horses through particularly difficult sections. Evelyn walked alongside during the worst parts, keeping the boys calm, pointing out hawks circling overhead and deer watching from the tree line. By the third day, the landscape had become almost alien. Towering pines, granite outcroppings, snow still clinging to shadowed slopes despite the spring warmth. The air was sharp and clean, scented with resin and stone. They saw no other people, no signs of human presence except the faint trail Caleb followed with the certainty of deep memory. "I came this way once a year," he said when Evelyn asked how he knew where to go. "To trade furs, get supplies, memorized every turn, every landmark, some things you don't forget." Late on the 4th day, as shadows lengthened and Evelyn was beginning to wonder if they'd have to make another camp, Caleb pulled the horses to a stop. Ahead, the trail opened into a valley, a high mountain meadow surrounded by peaks, with a creek running through its center and a stand of pine on the northern edge. And there, barely visible among the trees, stood a cabin. Evelyn felt Caleb go rigid beside her. His hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles went white. "That's it," he said, voice hollow. "That's home." They approached slowly, the wagon wheels creaking in the silence. The cabin was smaller than the one they'd left, built tight against the weather with a steep roof and narrow windows. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. The porch had partially collapsed, but the structure itself looked sound. Solid logs, good craftsmanship, built to last. Caleb didn't move to get down. He sat frozen, staring at the cabin like it might vanish if he blinked. "Caleb?" Evelyn touched his arm gently. "I can't." "You can. We're right here with you." Everything's still in there, all of it. Her clothes, the dishes she used, the cradle. His breath came short and fast. "I can't walk in there and see it all again." "Then I'll go first." Evelyn climbed down, motioned for the boys to stay in the wagon. "Wait here, all of you." She approached the cabin alone, her heart hammering. The door resisted at first, swollen from years of weather, then swung inward with a groan. Dust and stale air rushed out. Evelyn stepped inside, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. The interior was frozen in time, exactly as Caleb had described. A table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, quilt still spread across it, shelves holding tin cups, plates, a few books. And in the corner, bathed in the last light coming through the window, a cradle carved from dark wood, so beautifully made it took her breath away. Evelyn moved through the space slowly, cataloging everything. Women's clothing hung on pegs, deerskin dresses decorated with intricate beadwork, a wool shawl, moccasins so small they must have belonged to a child. Personal items scattered across surfaces suggested lives interrupted rather than ended. A hairbrush with long dark strands still caught in the bristles, a pair of spectacles, a half-finished basket. She found the thing she was looking for on the mantel, a small wooden box carefully carved. Inside were 2 locks of hair, one black and silky, one finer and lighter. A woman's hair, a child's hair, preserved with love and care. Evelyn stood in that cabin, surrounded by the ghosts of Caleb's first family, and felt no jealousy, only profound sadness for what he'd lost, and determination to help him honor it properly. She went back outside. Caleb was still in the wagon, Thomas and Jacob watching him with worried eyes. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said quietly. "Everything she made, everything she touched, it's all beautiful, and she would be so proud of what you built here." "I left them. You survived. There's a difference." She held out her hand. "Come inside, Caleb. Come home." He climbed down slowly, moving like a man walking to his execution. But he took her hand, let her guide him toward the door. The boys followed, sensing this was important. Caleb stopped at the threshold, breathing hard. Then, with visible effort, he stepped inside. The sound he made was broken, raw. He stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, taking in every detail. His gaze landed on the cradle and stayed there. "I made that for her," he whispered. "Carved it from cedar. Took me 3 months. She loved it. I can tell." He moved to the cradle, knelt beside it, ran his fingers over the smooth wood. She would sleep in it while Ayanna worked. I'd watch them both, thinking I was the luckiest man alive. His voice cracked. And then they were gone and the cradle was empty and I couldn't bear to look at it. Evelyn knelt beside him, placed her hand over his. "It's still beautiful, still full of love. That doesn't go away just because they're gone. It hurts. I know. But pain means it mattered, means they were real and loved and important." She waited until he looked at her. "And they still are, Caleb. We're not here to erase them. We're here to honor them." Thomas approached cautiously. "Did your little girl sleep in that?" "She did. It's really pretty." He touched the carved edge gently. "You're good at making things." "My wife taught me. Said a man's hands should create, not just destroy." Jacob moved closer, studying the beadwork on one of the dresses. "These are so fancy." "Ayanna made those. Each pattern meant something, her family's symbols, protection prayers, wishes for good fortune." Caleb stood slowly, moved to the dress, touched the beadwork with reverent fingers. She was an artist. Everything she made was beautiful. "Like Mama's sewing," Jacob said brightly. "She makes things pretty too." The comparison seemed to ground Caleb, pull him back from the edge of grief. He looked at Evelyn, and something in his expression shifted. "We should air this place out," he said, voice steadier. "Get it livable again." They spent the rest of the day opening windows, sweeping out years of dust and debris, carrying in their supplies. Caleb worked methodically, touching things he'd avoided for a decade. Ayanna's belongings, their daughter's toys, the everyday objects of a life lived and lost. He didn't put anything away, didn't try to erase the evidence of his first family. Instead, he made space beside it for the new one, creating a home that honored both past and present. Evelyn found him that evening sitting on the porch, staring at the meadow as the sun set behind the peaks. She sat beside him, waited. "There's a spot under the pine trees," he said finally, "where I buried them. I should visit, pay my respects. But I don't know if I can." "Then we'll go together, Tomorrow, when you're ready. What if I'm never ready? Then we'll go anyway. Because some things have to be done whether we're ready or not. He leaned against her, exhausted by emotion and memory. How are you so strong? I'm not. I'm terrified. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving, so I might as well be useful. That got a small, broken laugh from him. Useful. That's one way to put it. What would you call it? Essential. He took her hand. You're essential, Evelyn. I couldn't do this without you. Good thing you don't have to. They sat together as darkness fell, the valley quiet around them except for the creek's constant murmur and the wind moving through the pines. Inside the cabin, the boys were settling into the loft space Caleb had built years ago for a daughter who never grew old enough to use it. Now it held Thomas and Jacob, their voices drifting through the window as they played with wooden horses before sleep. It's strange, Caleb said quietly, being back here. I thought it would destroy me, but with you here with the boys, it's different. Still painful, but not just painful. There's something else too. What? Hope, maybe. The possibility that this place could mean something besides loss. He looked at her. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. I'm glad you're here, Evelyn. Glad we're doing this together. So am I. They stayed on the porch until the stars emerged, bright and close in the thin mountain air. Then they went inside to the cabin that held so much history, carrying with them the hope that history didn't have to be an ending. It could be a foundation for something new. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Caleb was up before the sun, building a fire, making coffee in the battered pot he'd used 10 years ago. Evelyn found him standing at the window, cup in hand, staring toward the pine grove. Today? She asked quietly. Today. After breakfast, they walked across the meadow together, all four of them, because the boys had asked to come and Caleb hadn't refused. The grass was wet with dew, soaking their boots. Birds called from the trees. The morning light turned everything gold. The grave was under the largest pine, marked by two simple wooden crosses that had weathered but still stood. The names carved into them were barely legible: Ayanna Reed and Sarah Reed. Wildflowers had grown up around the crosses, white and purple, nodding in the breeze. Caleb stopped several feet away, breathing hard. Evelyn took his hand, held tight. I'm sorry, he said, voice breaking. I'm so sorry I stayed away, that I left you here alone, that I was too weak to come back. You came back now, Evelyn said softly. That's what matters. It's been 10 years. 10 years of neglect, of forgetting. You never forgot. You carried them with you every day. That's not neglect, Caleb. That's love. He knelt before the graves, placed both hands flat on the ground. I brought someone to meet you, he said, speaking to the earth. Her name is Evelyn. She's brave and kind and everything I don't deserve. And she's got two boys, Thomas and Jacob, who need a father. His voice roughened. I know I can't replace you, Ayanna. Can't give Sarah the life she should have had. But I can try to build something good here, something that honors what we had by not wasting what's left. Thomas stepped forward, placed a small bundle of wildflowers between the crosses. We'll take care of him, he said solemnly, and this place. We promise. Jacob nodded seriously, adding his own flowers to the pile. Evelyn felt tears slip down her cheeks. We'll keep them safe, she told the graves. Your memory, this place, everything you built together. And we'll make sure what happened here meant something. They stayed for a long time, the four of them together under the pine tree, honoring the dead while committing to the living. Finally, Caleb stood, wiping his eyes, and turned to face the meadow and the cabin beyond. We have work to do, he said. Improvements to make, taxes to pay, a claim to establish. He looked at Evelyn. Ready? Ready. The next weeks were brutal. Hard physical labor from dawn to dusk. Caleb repaired the cabin's porch, replaced damaged shingles, reinforced the walls. Evelyn planted a garden in the rich mountain soil, sewed new curtains, organized the space to accommodate 5 people instead of 2. Thomas and Jacob helped where they could, learning to chop kindling, 10 chickens Caleb had brought from a trading post 2 days' ride away, fetch water from the creek. Every improvement was documented carefully. Caleb kept a journal, noting dates and work completed, saving receipts for materials and supplies. They paid 10 years of back taxes in a lump sum that hurt, but was necessary. And slowly, painstakingly, they transformed the cabin from a monument to loss into a living, breathing home. But it wasn't easy. Some days Caleb would find something, a toy, a dress, a carved spoon, and freeze, overcome by memory. Evelyn learned to recognize the signs, to give him space when he needed it and support when he'd accept it. She never pushed, never demanded he move faster than he could manage. Other days the isolation wore on her. No neighbors, no town, no one to talk to except Caleb and two young boys. The silence was oppressive sometimes, broken only by wind and water and the occasional animal call. She'd stand on the porch, looking at the surrounding peaks, and wonder if they'd made a terrible mistake. But then Caleb would come up behind her, wrap his arms around her waist, and ask what she was thinking. And she'd lean back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, and remember why they were here. "We're doing the right thing," she'd say. "You sure?" Positive. 1 month became 2. The garden flourished in the mountain sun. The boys grew brown and strong, adapting to wilderness life with remarkable ease. Caleb began to smile more often, laugh at Jacob's endless questions, teach Thomas how to track deer and read weather signs. And slowly, carefully, he began to heal. One evening, as they sat on the newly repaired porch watching the sunset, Caleb reached for Evelyn's hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing what I couldn't, for believing this could be more than a graveyard." He gestured to the valley, the cabin, the life they were building. "For making it home again." "It was always home, Caleb. It just needed people in it who weren't afraid to live." He pulled her close, kissed her temple. "I love you, Evelyn Reed. Should have said it sooner, but I'm saying it now. I love you." The words landed like grace. Evelyn turned in his arms, looked into those storm-gray eyes, and smiled. "I love you too." It wasn't the romantic declaration of novels or songs. It was quieter than that, built on shared work and mutual respect and the 1,000 small moments that had woven their lives together. But it was real, and it was earned, and it was exactly what they both needed. That night, for the first time, they came together as husband and wife in truth, not out of obligation or convenience, but out of genuine desire and deepening love. And in the cabin that had once held so much sorrow, they created something new and precious and entirely their own. The morning brought rain, soft at first, then building to a steady drumming on the cabin roof. Evelyn woke wrapped in Caleb's arms, the warmth of his body a comfort against the mountain chill. She lay still for a moment, listening to his breathing, feeling the rise and fall of his chest against her back. Everything had changed last night, yet nothing had changed. They were still the same people facing the same challenges. But there was a rightness to it now, a sense of being exactly where they were meant to be. Caleb stirred, tightened his hold on her. "Morning," he murmured against her hair. "Morning." She turned to face him. "Did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years." He traced her jawline with gentle fingers. "You?" "The same." They lay together, reluctant to break the spell, until Thomas's voice drifted down from the loft. "Mama? It's raining." "I hear it, sweet." "Can we still go fishing like Caleb promised?" Caleb smiled against Evelyn's shoulder. "Rain or shine," I said. "That creek's full of trout, and they bite better when it's wet." The day unfolded with comfortable domesticity despite the weather. Caleb took the boys to the creek, all 3 of them returning soaked and triumphant with 6 fat trout. Evelyn fried them for lunch, the smell filling the cabin with warmth. Afterward, while the rain continued, Caleb taught Thomas how to tie fishing knots and Jacob how to sharpen a knife safely. It was ordinary and perfect, the kind of day that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago when Evelyn had stepped off that stagecoach into uncertainty. But the peace didn't last. 2 days later, a rider appeared in the valley, the first person they'd seen since arriving. Caleb spotted him from the porch, went rigid. "Company," he said, voice tight. Evelyn came to stand beside him, shading her eyes. The rider was dressed in Eastern clothes, riding a horse too fine for mountain travel. Even from a distance, she recognized the calculated confidence in his posture. "Howard Winters," she said. How did he find us? He's a lawyer. Finding people is what they do. Caleb's jaw set hard. Take the boys inside. Stay there until I tell you it's safe. Caleb, please, Evelyn. I need to know you're protected. She wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. She called the boys, herded them inside, but positioned herself by the window where she could see and hear everything. Winters dismounted near the porch, looking around with undisguised disdain. The valley was beautiful, but Evelyn could imagine how it appeared to someone from Cheyenne, isolated, primitive, impossibly remote. Mr. Reed, Winters said, brushing rain from his coat, I must say, you're a difficult man to track down. That's the idea. Caleb stood with his arms crossed, blocking the porch steps. What do you want? To talk sense into you. You've been up here for 2 months now, making improvements, establishing presence. Very clever, but ultimately futile. The claim's legal. We've paid the back taxes, documented everything. You've got no grounds. Actually, we do. The Union Pacific has filed a challenge based on public interest. The route through this valley would save 6 months of construction time and considerable expense. The territorial governor is sympathetic to the argument that one man's sentimental attachment doesn't outweigh progress for thousands. This isn't about sentiment, it's about property rights. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a man who abandoned valuable land for a decade, then scrambled to reclaim it only when someone else showed interest. Winters smiled coldly. The courts will see it the same way. Then let them. I'll fight this as long as it takes. At what cost? Legal fees will bankrupt you. The strain of a prolonged court battle will destroy your new family. His gaze flicked toward the cabin, toward where Evelyn stood watching. Mrs. Reed seems like a sensible woman. Does she really want to waste years of her life fighting a battle you can't win? Don't talk about my wife. I'm simply being practical. The railroad is offering $750 now, increased from the original offer because you've improved the property. That's more money than you'd see in 5 years of ranching. Take it, Mr. Reed. Walk away while you still can. Caleb took a step forward, and Winters instinctively stepped back. You listen to me carefully, Caleb said, voice low and dangerous. My wife and daughter are buried under that pine tree. This valley is their resting place, and I will burn in hell before I let your railroad tear through it. You're being unreasonable. I'm being a husband and a father, something you clearly don't understand. Caleb gestured toward the trail. Now get off my property before I forget I'm trying to be civilized. Winters remounted, but his expression had shifted from condescension to something harder. You're making a mistake, Reed. The railroad doesn't lose. We'll take this land one way or another, and you'll have nothing to show for your stubbornness except debt and regret. We'll see. Indeed, we will. Expect formal papers within the month. I suggest you use that time to reconsider. He wheeled his horse around, then paused. Oh, and Reed, the court date is set for September, in Cheyenne. Don't miss it. He rode off, leaving tension thick in the air. Caleb stood on the porch, hands clenched into fists, breathing hard. Evelyn came outside, touched his shoulder. He's bluffing. He's not. The railroad has unlimited resources and political connections. They can drag this out for years, bleed us dry with legal fees, and eventually win through sheer attrition. So what do we do? Caleb turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her heart ache. I don't know. Samuel Brennan's good, but he's one lawyer against an army. We can't afford a prolonged fight. Then we find another way to win. There is no other way. It's a legal battle now. Evelyn thought hard, turning the problem over in her mind. There had to be something they weren't seeing, some angle Winters hadn't anticipated. What if we made the railroad not want the land? She said slowly. How? By making it politically toxic, by getting people on our side, making this about more than just property rights. She gripped his arm. You said Ayanna was Shoshone. Were her people from this area? Her father's band has summer camps about 30 miles north. Why? Because if we can prove this valley has cultural or spiritual significance to her people, the railroad can't just bulldoze through. The territorial government might cave to railroad pressure, but they can't completely ignore tribal concerns, not without serious political backlash. Caleb stared at her. That's actually brilliant. It's a gamble. We'd need cooperation from Ayana's family, and I don't know if they'd be willing after all this time. Her father, Greyhawk, he never blamed me for what happened, knew I did everything I could. Caleb's expression shifted, hope flickering to life. He might help, especially if it means protecting his daughter's resting place. Then we ride out tomorrow, talk to him, see if he'll stand with us. That night, they made plans. Caleb would go to the Shoshone camp, taking Thomas with him. The boy was old enough to make the journey, and it would teach him important lessons about the land and the people who'd inhabited it long before settlers arrived. Evelyn would stay with Jacob, continue documenting improvements, and hold down the homestead. I don't like leaving you, Caleb said as they packed supplies. I'll be fine. We've got food, water, and I know how to use a rifle if needed. She folded a shirt, tucked it into his saddlebag. Besides, this is important. More important than me being nervous for a few days. More than nervous, you'll be alone out here except for Jacob. I've been alone before. This is different. I know you're coming back. He pulled her close, kissed her deeply. 4 days. 5 at most. Then I'll be home. I'll be counting. They left at first light, Caleb on his horse with Thomas riding behind, both of them dressed for hard travel. Evelyn stood on the porch with Jacob, watching until they disappeared into the trees. Then she went inside, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. The next 3 days were the longest of her life. She kept busy, weeding the garden, mending clothes, teaching Jacob his letters, baking bread. But the isolation pressed on her in ways it hadn't when Caleb was there. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. On the third night, a storm rolled through, violent and sudden, with lightning that turned the world white and thunder that shook the cabin walls. Jacob crawled into bed with her, shaking with fear. "When's Papa coming home?" he asked, using the name he'd started calling Caleb a few weeks earlier. "Soon, sweet. Very soon." What if something happened to them? Nothing happened. They're safe. She held him close, hoping she was right. Your papa knows these mountains better than anyone. He'll keep Thomas safe. Promise? Promise. But lying in the darkness with wind howling outside and Jacob's small body pressed against hers, Evelyn felt doubt creep in. What if something had gone wrong? What if the Shoshone had refused to help? What if Caleb had been injured, or... She forced the thoughts away. Fear was useless. All she could do was wait and trust. The fourth morning dawned clear and bright. Evelyn was hanging laundry when Jacob shouted from the porch, "Mama, riders!" Her heart leaped. She ran to the front of the cabin, shading her eyes against the sun. 2 horses emerged from the tree line. Caleb and Thomas, both safe and whole. But behind them rode 3 more horses carrying Shoshone men, their long hair decorated with feathers, faces weathered by sun and wind. Caleb dismounted, caught Evelyn in a fierce embrace. "We did it," he said against her hair. "They're going to help." The Shoshone men dismounted with quiet dignity. The eldest, a man perhaps 70 with silver hair and eyes like flint, stepped forward. "You are Ayana's husband," he said in heavily accented English. "The one who made her happy." Caleb's throat worked. "I tried to, Greyhawk. I tried to save her too, but I failed." "No man controls death, only how he lives afterward." Greyhawk looked around the valley, his gaze settling on the pine grove. "My daughter rests here?" "Yes, with our child." "Then this is sacred ground. The railroad will not pass." He turned to Evelyn, studied her with penetrating intensity. "You are the new wife." "I am." Evelyn held his gaze steadily. "And I swear to you, I honor Ayana's memory. She'll never be forgotten or replaced." Something softened in Greyhawk's expression. "She would approve of you. You have the strength she valued." He gestured to his companions. "We will stay 3 days, document what must be documented. Then we return to our people with word of this desecration the white men plan." Over the next 3 days, the valley became something different, a gathering place where 2 worlds met and found common ground. Greyhawk and his men performed ceremonies at Ayana's grave, singing songs Caleb remembered from his marriage, marking the site with traditional symbols. They taught Thomas and Jacob a few words of Shoshone, showed them how to read animal signs, shared stories around the fire at night. Evelyn watched Caleb during these days, saw how he moved between worlds. White settler and honorary member of Ayana's people, past and present somehow reconciled. He translated stories, explained customs, and slowly began to look less haunted when he spoke of his first wife. On the final evening, Greyhawk sat with Caleb and Evelyn on the porch while the boys played in the meadow. "The territorial agent will not like what we do," he said, "but the newspapers will care. White people pretend not to value our ways, but they do not like looking cruel in front of their own kind." He smiled grimly. "We will make much noise, bring shame to the railroad's plans. Maybe it will be enough." "Thank you," Caleb said, "for coming here, for helping. You love my daughter well, protected her in life, honor her in death. This is what family does." Greyhawk stood, placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "She is at peace. Let yourself be also." The words hit Caleb visibly. He nodded, unable to speak. The Shoshone left the next morning, taking with them detailed documentation of the burial site, signed statements from Caleb, and photographs one of Greyhawk's sons had learned to make. They promised to contact newspapers in San Francisco and Denver to make noise in ways that would force the territorial government to pay attention. When they were gone, the valley felt quiet again, but it was a different quiet than before, purposeful instead of empty. "Do you think it'll work?" Thomas asked that night at supper. "I don't know," Caleb admitted, "but we've done everything we can. Now we wait and see what happens." The waiting was harder than the work had been. Weeks passed with no word from the outside world. They continued improving the homestead, preparing for winter, living day to day. Evelyn discovered she was pregnant in late July, a realization that filled her with equal parts joy and terror. "We're going to have a baby," she told Caleb one evening, her hands shaking. He went very still. "Are you sure?" "Yes." For a long moment he didn't react. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I'm scared," he whispered. "So am I. What if something happens? What if I lose you like I lost—" "You won't." She pulled back to look at him. "I'm strong, Caleb, healthy. And this baby is wanted and loved already. That makes all the difference." "Does it?" "Yes." She took his hand, placed it on her still flat belly. "This is our future. Not the railroad, not the court case, not the past. This." He knelt before her, pressed his forehead against her stomach. "I'll keep you both safe," he promised. "Whatever it takes." In August, a letter arrived via a passing trapper who'd been paid to deliver it. The envelope bore Samuel Brennan's seal. Caleb opened it with shaking hands, read silently, then looked up at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't read. "Well?" she demanded. Greyhawk kept his word. The San Francisco Chronicle ran a story about the railroad trying to build through a sacred burial ground. "It's causing a scandal. People are angry. Church groups are protesting. Even some politicians are speaking out against it." "That's wonderful." "There's more. The territorial governor has agreed to mediate a settlement hearing before the court date. He wants to avoid bad publicity." Caleb's hands tightened on the letter. "If we can convince him the cultural significance outweighs the railroad's interests, he might deny their petition entirely." "When?" 3 weeks, in Cheyenne." He looked at her belly. "Can you travel?" "I'm pregnant, not broken. Of course I can travel." "It's a hard journey. So is staying here wondering what's happening." She took the letter, scanned it herself. "We go together. All of us. We face this as a family, and we show them exactly what they're trying to destroy." The journey to Cheyenne was everything Evelyn had feared, and more. The wagon jolted over rough roads, making her nauseous. The heat was oppressive. By the time they reached the territorial capital, she was exhausted, sore, and fighting to keep food down. But she held her head high as they entered the hearing room, Caleb on one side, Thomas and Jacob flanking her on the other. Greyhawk and 2 of his sons were already there, along with Samuel Brennan and a crowd of observers, newspapermen, curious citizens, and railroad representatives in expensive suits. Howard Winters sat at the opposing table, his expression cold when he saw them. The territorial governor, a portly man named Harrison with mutton chop whiskers and calculating eyes, called the hearing to order. "This is an informal settlement discussion," he announced. "Not a trial. The purpose is to determine if there's a solution that satisfies all parties without prolonged legal action. He looked at Winters. The railroad may present its case. Winters stood, smooth and confident. He laid out the railroad's arguments with practiced ease. The route through the valley would save time and money, benefit the territory's economy, bring progress to an undeveloped region. He acknowledged the graves but dismissed their significance. One man's personal tragedy shouldn't impede progress for thousands, he concluded. Mr. Reed abandoned this land for a decade. His recent attempts to reclaim it are transparent opportunism. Then it was Caleb's turn. He stood slowly, visibly nervous. Public speaking wasn't natural to him. But when he began, his voice was steady. "My first wife and daughter are buried in that valley," he said. "Not as a matter of sentiment, but as a matter of fact. That land isn't just property to me. It's a sacred trust. I left because grief broke me. I came back because I finally found the strength to honor them properly." He gestured to Greyhawk. Ayana was Shoshone. Her people have used that valley for generations. The graves aren't just mine to protect. They belong to an entire culture. Greyhawk stood, spoke in Shoshone first, then in halting English. "The white men take and take. Our land, our children, our dead. This valley holds my daughter's bones. I will not let machines tear through her resting place so rich men can save time." His voice grew stronger. "We are not vanished. We are not forgotten. And we will not be silent." The room erupted in murmurs. Governor Harrison banged his gavel for silence. "This presents a dilemma," he said slowly. "The railroad has legitimate economic arguments, but the cultural and moral concerns are significant." He looked at Caleb. "Is there any compromise you'd accept? Perhaps relocating the graves?" "No." Caleb's voice was absolute. "They rest where they chose to live. Moving them would be a desecration." "Then what solution do you propose?" It was Evelyn who stood, surprising everyone, including Caleb. She smoothed her dress, placed one hand protectively over her belly, and addressed the governor directly. "Reroute the railroad," she said clearly. "The valley is narrow, but there are other passes. It might cost more time and money, but some things are worth protecting." She looked at the assembled crowd, at the newspapermen scribbling notes. "We came west seeking opportunity and freedom. But freedom means respecting the people who were here first. It means honoring the dead instead of trampling them. And it means understanding that progress without conscience isn't progress at all. It's just destruction." The silence that followed was profound. Governor Harrison studied her for a long moment. "Well said, Mrs. Reed." He turned to Winters. "Does the railroad have a response?" Winters stood, but for the first time he looked uncertain. "The rerouting would add considerable expense. Money you can afford." Evelyn didn't sit down. "The Union Pacific makes millions. Surely you can spare some to avoid desecrating graves and betraying basic human decency." One of the newspapermen called out, "Is the railroad really willing to destroy a family's burial ground to save a few dollars?" Another voice, "What about the territorial laws protecting cultural sites?" The hearing descended into chaos. Governor Harrison gavelled for order repeatedly. Finally, he stood. "This hearing is adjourned. I'll issue a decision within 1 week after consulting with territorial legal counsel and tribal representatives." He looked meaningfully at Winters. "I suggest the railroad consider its public image very carefully before we reconvene." They walked out into the Cheyenne afternoon, exhausted but hopeful. Newspapermen surrounded them, asking questions, taking notes. Caleb kept his arm around Evelyn, steering her through the crowd. Greyhawk stopped them at the edge of the street. "You spoke well," he told Evelyn, "with the strength of a mother protecting her young." She smiled tiredly. "I'm learning from the best." They stayed in Cheyenne for the week, waiting for the governor's decision. The newspapers ran daily stories, some favorable, some critical, all generating public discussion. Protests formed outside the railroad offices. Church groups issued statements. The pressure built steadily. On the 7th day, Governor Harrison issued his ruling. The railroad's petition was denied. The cultural and moral significance of the burial ground outweighed economic concerns. The Union Pacific would be required to reroute around the valley, and the Reed family's claim would be upheld and protected under territorial law as a recognized cultural site. When Samuel Brennan read them the decision, Evelyn felt Caleb's knees buckle. She held him up, both of them shaking with relief and disbelief. "We won," she whispered. "Caleb, we won." "I can't believe it." "Believe it." She turned his face to hers. "The valley is ours. Your family's resting place is protected, and we can go home." The journey back was lighter, despite the physical challenges. They stopped at the valley where Caleb had first buried Ayanna and Sarah, spent a day there together paying respects. Greyhawk had left traditional markers, and the site felt peaceful, honored. "Thank you," Caleb said to the graves, "for giving me the strength to fight for this, for sending Evelyn to me when I needed her most, for letting me build something good from the ashes." He paused. "I'll never forget you, but I'm going to live now, really live. I hope that's all right." The wind sighed through the pines, carrying the scent of sage and earth, and Evelyn could have sworn she heard, beneath the wind, a sound like blessing. They returned to the mountain valley in early September, when the aspen leaves were just beginning their transformation from green to gold. The cabin stood waiting, solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where Caleb had left embers banked in the stove. Coming home felt different this time, not like returning to a battleground or a shrine to the past, but like arriving at a place they'd truly earned the right to call theirs. Thomas and Jacob tumbled from the wagon, racing to check on the chickens in the garden. Caleb helped Evelyn down carefully, his hand lingering on her waist where the pregnancy was just beginning to show. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired, sore, happy." She looked around the valley, at the peaks rising on all sides, the creek sparkling in the afternoon sun. "We did it, Caleb. We actually did it." "You did it. That speech in Cheyenne?" He shook his head. "I've never seen anything like it. You stood up to the railroad, the governor, everyone, and you made them listen. We made them listen, together." She touched his cheek. "That's how this works, remember? We face things together." He kissed her palm. "I remember." The first weeks back settled into a comfortable rhythm. Caleb prepared the cabin for winter, cutting and stacking firewood until they had enough to last through the coldest months. Evelyn preserved vegetables from the garden, sewed warmer clothes for the boys, and began preparing space for the baby. Thomas helped with the heavy work, growing stronger and more confident every day. Jacob shadowed Caleb constantly, absorbing knowledge about the land, the animals, the ways of mountain survival. One morning in late September, Evelyn woke to find Caleb already up, standing in the corner of the cabin, staring at something. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and joined him. He was looking at the cradle, the beautiful cedar cradle he'd carved for his daughter Sarah more than a decade ago. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about this." Evelyn waited, letting him find the words. "When Sarah died, I couldn't bear to look at it. Seeing it empty felt like the worst kind of punishment." He ran his hand over the smooth wood. "But now, with the baby coming, maybe it doesn't have to be empty anymore." "Are you sure? We could build a new one." "No." He turned to face her. "This cradle was made with love for a child who deserved better than she got. Using it for our daughter honors Sarah's memory instead of erasing it. Shows that love doesn't end just because life does." "Our daughter?" Evelyn smiled. "You think it's a girl?" "I know it is. I can feel it." He placed his hand on her belly. "And I want her to sleep in the cradle her sister never got to use. Want both of them connected somehow." Tears stung Evelyn's eyes. "That's beautiful, Caleb. Is it strange, wanting to use something from before?" "No, it's perfect." She covered his hand with hers. "Sarah would want her cradle to hold a baby, to fulfill the purpose it was made for. And our daughter will grow up knowing she had a sister who came before her, who's part of this family even though she's gone." He pulled her close, and they stood together beside the cradle, building bridges between past and present, loss and hope, grief and joy. October brought the first real cold, frost painting the meadow white in the mornings. Caleb took Thomas hunting, teaching him to track elk and read the signs of approaching weather. They returned with meat that Evelyn smoked and preserved, stocking the larder for winter. Jacob learned to card wool from the sheep Caleb had traded for, his small hands surprisingly deft at the repetitive work. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Evelyn tired more easily at the high altitude. Caleb watched her like a hawk, insisting she rest often, refusing to let her lift anything heavy. His protectiveness would have been smothering if it hadn't come from such obvious love and fear. "I'm not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he'd practically carried her to a chair after she'd spent an hour kneading bread. "I know, but humor me anyway. Caleb, women have been having babies since the beginning of time, in conditions far worse than this. Not my wife. Not my baby." He knelt beside her chair. "I can't lose you, Evelyn. I won't survive it again." She cupped his face in her hands. "You're not going to lose me. I'm strong, the baby's healthy, and when the time comes, I'll bring our daughter into this world safe and sound. You have to trust that." "I'm trying." "Try harder." She kissed him softly. "Because I need you present, not paralyzed by fear. Our daughter needs a father who believes in her strength, not one who's already mourning what hasn't happened." The words were gentle but firm, and they seemed to reach him. He took a deep breath, nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just be here. Fully here." He rested his forehead against her belly. "I'm here. I promise." In November, the first major snow arrived, 3 feet in one night, transforming the valley into a pristine white wilderness. The boys were ecstatic, building snow forts and having battles, while Caleb shoveled paths between the cabin, barn, and outhouse. The world became smaller, quieter, the family drawn close by necessity and choice. On Thanksgiving, Evelyn roasted a wild turkey Caleb had shot, made bread from their dwindling flour supply, and stewed dried apples with cinnamon. They ate at the table, all 4 of them, plus the ghost of Sarah, whose small carved chair Caleb had brought down from the loft and placed at the table's end. "Why is that chair there?" Jacob asked. "For Sarah," Caleb said simply. "So she's part of our family meal." Thomas looked at the empty chair thoughtfully. "Do you think she can see us? From heaven?" "I think so. And I think she's happy we're here, taking care of the place she loved." "I wish I could have met her," Jacob said. "And your first wife, too." "They would have liked you both. Ayana loved children, and Sarah would have been thrilled to have brothers." Caleb's voice was steady, the pain of remembering softened by time and healing. "But you're here now, and that's what matters. You and your mama and the baby coming. You're my family, and I'm grateful for every single day we have together." Evelyn felt emotion swell in her chest. This man who'd been so broken, so isolated, sitting at a table surrounded by children and speaking of gratitude with complete sincerity, it was a transformation so profound it still took her breath away. After dinner, while the boys played with wooden toys Caleb had carved, he and Evelyn sat by the fire. "Do you miss our other cabin?" she asked. "The one near Sweetwater?" "Sometimes. It was easier there, more convenient." He considered. "But this is home, real home, the kind worth fighting for." "Even in winter? When we're snowed in for weeks at a time?" "Especially then, because we're together, we're safe, and we've earned every inch of this place." He laced his fingers through hers. "No regrets, Evelyn. Not one." "Good. Because I'm about to get very large and uncomfortable, and I need you to not regret this baby." He laughed, a sound that still surprised her with its rarity and richness. "I could never regret her. She's proof that life goes on, that love is stronger than loss." "When did you become a philosopher?" "When I married a woman who wouldn't let me hide from the truth." December arrived with brutal cold and shorter days. Evelyn's belly swelled prominently now, the baby active and strong. She felt kicks at odd hours, movements that reassured and amazed her. Caleb would place his hand on her stomach, feeling their daughter move, his expression a mixture of wonder and terror. "She's real," he'd whisper. "Actually real." "What did you think she was? Imaginary?" "I don't know. Part of me keeps expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, that I'm still alone in the mountains, frozen and hollow." "Well, you're not. This is real, Caleb. All of it." Christmas came quietly. They had no decorations except pine boughs Caleb cut and arranged around the cabin, filling the air with their sharp, clean scent. Evelyn baked what she could with limited supplies. Caleb surprised the boys with new boots he'd been making in secret, perfectly sized and beautifully crafted. For Evelyn, he'd carved a rocking chair, sturdy, comfortable, sized for nursing a baby. For after she's born, he said, watching anxiously as she tested it. So you'll have somewhere comfortable to sit with her. Evelyn ran her hands over the smooth wood, the careful joinery, the rockers curved just right. It's perfect. The most thoughtful gift anyone's ever given me. I wanted you to have something that was just yours, something made with love. She pulled him down for a kiss. You've given me everything, Caleb. A home, a family, safety, purpose. This chair is beautiful, but you're the real gift. For him, she'd sewn a new shirt from fabric she'd carefully hoarded, embroidered at the collar with a pattern she'd copied from one of Ayana's dresses, a small tribute to the woman who'd come before her, a bridge between past and present. When he saw it, Caleb's eyes filled with tears. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She's part of our family too. This way, you carry both of us with you. He held the shirt like it was made of light, tracing the embroidery with gentle fingers. Thank you. For understanding, for honoring her memory instead of resenting it. How could I resent the woman who taught you how to love, who showed you that happiness was possible? Evelyn took his hand. She gave me you, Caleb. That makes her a gift, not a threat. January brought the deepest cold, temperatures so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows despite the fire burning constantly. They stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only for essential chores. The boys studied reading and arithmetic at the table, their breath visible in the air despite the stove's heat. Evelyn grew increasingly uncomfortable, her belly enormous, her back aching constantly. How much longer? She asked Caleb one night as he rubbed her feet. 6 weeks, maybe 7, early March if the timing's right. That feels like forever. I know, but she'll come when she's ready. He looked up at her. Are you scared? Terrified, she admitted. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do this? You can. Women in your family have been doing this for generations. You're strong, Evelyn, stronger than you know. What if the baby? Don't. He moved to sit beside her, pulled her close. Don't borrow trouble. We'll face what comes when it comes, but don't torture yourself with what-ifs. She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, you'll take care of her. Raise her to know she was wanted and loved. Don't let grief consume you again. Nothing's going to happen. Promise me, Caleb. He was quiet for a long time, then, I promise, but only if you promise to fight like hell to stay with us. Because we need you. I need you. I promise. They sat together in the firelight, holding each other, building courage for the trial ahead. February proved unusually mild, the snow melting faster than expected. Evelyn waddled rather than walked, her body preparing for birth in ways both fascinating and uncomfortable. Caleb became hypervigilant, barely letting her out of his sight, jumping at every grimace or complaint. You're going to drive yourself mad, she told him after he'd insisted for the 3rd time that day that she sit down and rest. Better mad than unprepared. I'm not due for weeks yet. Babies come when they want to. Sarah came 3 weeks early. The mention of his first daughter was casual, easy, a sign of how far he'd traveled from the lockdown grief of before. Evelyn smiled. Then I guess we'd better make sure everything's ready. They spent the next days preparing obsessively. Caleb boiled water and stored it in covered pots. Evelyn washed and rewashed linens, prepared the cradle with soft blankets, organized supplies. Thomas and Jacob were given strict instructions about what to do when labor started. Stay upstairs in the loft, be quiet, help each other stay calm. What if something goes wrong? Thomas asked, worry creasing his young face. Then your papa will handle it, Evelyn said firmly. He delivered Sarah by himself. He knows what to do. But what if... Thomas. She took his shoulders gently. I know you're scared, but fear doesn't help. Trust and preparation do. So trust that we're ready, that your papa is capable, and that your sister is strong. Can you do that? He nodded, trying to be brave. Yes, Mama. Good boy. The labor started on a Tuesday morning in late February, 3 weeks before Evelyn's calculated due date. She woke to cramping pain that quickly intensified, waves of pressure that took her breath away. Caleb, she gasped, gripping his arm. He was awake instantly. Is it time? I think so. What followed was hours of pain, effort, and primal fear unlike anything Evelyn had experienced. Caleb stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her face, coaching her through contractions with calm authority that belied his own terror. "You're doing so well," he murmured during a brief respite. "So strong. It hurts. I know, but you're built for this. Your body knows what to do. What if something's wrong? Nothing's wrong. The baby's positioned right, you're progressing normally. This is supposed to hurt. It's supposed to be hard. But you can do hard things, Evelyn. You've proved that over and over." His certainty anchored her. When the pain became unbearable, she focused on his voice, his presence, the steady belief in his eyes that she would survive this. The final stage came as the sun was setting, painting the cabin in shades of gold and rose. Evelyn pushed with everything she had, feeling her body tear and stretch and do the impossible work of bringing life into the world. And then, after one last tremendous effort, a baby's cry split the air. "She's here," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "Our daughter's here." He worked quickly, efficiently, cutting the cord and wrapping the baby in clean linen. Then he placed her in Evelyn's arms, a tiny, perfect creature with dark hair and lungs that worked magnificently. "Hello, sweetheart," Evelyn whispered through tears. "Hello, my beautiful girl." The baby quieted at her voice, eyes trying to focus. Caleb sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Evelyn, the other hand gently touching their daughter's cheek. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "She is." Evelyn looked up at him, saw tears streaming down his face. "We did it, Caleb. We made it through." "You did it. You were incredible." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips. "Thank you for fighting, for staying, for giving me this." Thomas and Jacob appeared at the top of the loft ladder, having stayed quiet as instructed but unable to contain their curiosity any longer. "Can we see her?" Thomas called down. "Come meet your sister," Caleb said. They climbed down carefully, approaching the bed with wide eyes. The baby, still unnamed, yawned and stretched in Evelyn's arms. "She's so small," Jacob whispered. "She'll grow. You were this small once." Evelyn adjusted the blanket so they could see her better. "Do you want to touch her hand?" Both boys reached out tentatively. The baby's tiny fingers curled around Jacob's thumb, and his face lit up with wonder. "She's holding me." "She knows you're her brother," Caleb ruffled Jacob's hair. "She's lucky to have you both." That night, after the boys had gone back to the loft and Evelyn had nursed the baby for the first time, Caleb placed their daughter in the cedar cradle, the one he'd carved with love and loss more than 10 years ago. "Sarah would be so happy," Evelyn said softly, watching him tuck the blanket around the baby. "I think she is." Caleb returned to the bed, gathered Evelyn carefully in his arms. "I feel like she's been waiting for this, for the cradle to hold a living child again, for this family to be complete." "What should we name her?" he considered. "Something that honors both worlds, the past and the future." "What about hope? For what she represents. The hope that brought us together, that carried us through everything. Hope." He tested the name, smiled. "Hope Sarah Reed. So she carries her sister with her always." "Perfect." They lay together in the firelight, exhausted and happy, listening to Hope's soft breathing from the cradle. Outside, the wind sang through the valley. Inside, a family slept, built from loss and love, grief and courage, past and present woven together into something whole. The weeks that followed were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Evelyn recovered slowly, her body healing from birth while adjusting to the demands of nursing. Hope proved to be a strong baby, eating well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Caleb was endlessly patient, changing diapers, walking the floor when Hope was fussy, taking over household duties so Evelyn could rest. Thomas and Jacob adapted to being big brothers with enthusiasm. They'd fetch blankets when Hope cried, sing to her in off-key voices, and compete for the honor of holding her under careful supervision. The cabin felt full in the best way, crowded with life and love and the beautiful chaos of family. In March, when the snow had mostly melted and the trails became passable again, Greyhawk arrived with 2 of his sons. They came bearing gifts, beaded moccasins for Hope, smoked meat, and a blessing ceremony for the new baby. "My granddaughter lives on," Greyhawk said, holding Hope with practiced ease. "In this child, in this place, in the love that surrounds her. This is good. This is how it should be." He performed traditional rituals, singing songs in Shoshone, marking Hope's forehead with sacred symbols. Caleb translated when he could, his voice thick with emotion. "He's welcoming her to both worlds," Caleb explained to Evelyn, saying she belongs to the earth and sky, to her white family and her Shoshone heritage, that she's protected by all who came before. When the ceremony ended, Greyhawk placed Hope back in Evelyn's arms. "You have given my son-in-law peace," he told her, "shown him that love does not end, only changes. For this, you have my gratitude and respect. Thank you for accepting us, for helping us protect this valley. It was always yours to protect. We simply reminded the world of what matters." He looked around the cabin at the evidence of life being lived fully. Ayanna would approve. She believed in second chances, in the power of love to heal. You honor her by living well. They stayed 2 days, filling the cabin with stories and laughter. When they left, they took with them the promise that this family would remain connected to Ayanna's people, that Hope would grow up knowing both sides of her heritage. Spring came in earnest, the meadow erupting with wildflowers. Evelyn regained her strength, able to work in the garden again with Hope strapped to her back in a carrier Caleb had made. The boys grew brown and strong, helping with planting, tending the expanding flock of chickens, learning the rhythms of mountain life. One afternoon in late April, Caleb returned from checking the fence line with a letter he'd retrieved from a passing trapper. "It's from Samuel Brennan," he said, opening it carefully. He read silently, then looked up with a strange expression. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "The railroad settled, officially withdrew their petition, and agreed to the alternate route. They're also paying compensation, $2,000, for the trouble and legal fees." He stared at the letter like it might disappear. "We won completely." $2,000? Evelyn's mind reeled. "Caleb, that's more money than most people see in a lifetime. It's blood money. Payment for trying to desecrate graves." His jaw tightened. "I don't want it." "Neither do I. But we could use it for something good, something that honors what we fought for." They discussed options over the next days. Finally, they decided to use part of the money to establish a small school in Sweetwater, open to all children, white and native alike. The rest they'd save for Hope's future, for emergencies, for building the life they wanted without constant financial fear. "Education," Evelyn said firmly. "That's how we change things, how we make sure the next generation does better than ours." "Ayanna would love that," Caleb agreed. "She taught me that knowledge was the greatest gift you could give someone." In May, they made their first trip back to Sweetwater since returning from Cheyenne. The town's reception was markedly different this time. People nodded respectfully as they passed. The mercantile owner congratulated them on the baby. Even Margaret Hastings managed a tight smile and a civil greeting. "Seems like winning against the railroad earned us some respect," Evelyn observed. "Or they're afraid we'll make trouble if they don't behave," Caleb said dryly. They met with Samuel Brennan to finalize the settlement paperwork and discuss the school funding. The lawyer was pleased with the idea, promising to help set it up properly. "You've done something remarkable," he told them as they prepared to leave. "Not just winning the case, but how you won it, standing on principle, honoring the past while building for the future. That's rare." On the way back to the valley, with Thomas and Jacob dozing in the wagon bed and Hope sleeping against Evelyn's chest, Caleb suddenly pulled the horses to a stop. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing's wrong. He looked at her, at the baby, at the boys, at the mountains rising around them. "I wanted to stop and remember this moment, because a year ago I was alone, broken, barely alive, and now I have everything. Everything that matters." Evelyn took his hand. "So do I. You gave me a home, Caleb. Not just walls and a roof, but belonging, purpose, love. You took a desperate woman with 2 scared boys and made us a family. We made us a family, both of us, together." "Together," she agreed. He leaned over, kissed her softly. Hope stirred between them, making the small sounds of a baby waking. Caleb touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Let's go home," he said. Summer arrived in full glory, the valley green and lush. They worked hard, expanding the garden, improving the cabin, building a better barn. Visitors came occasionally, trappers passing through, Greyhawk checking on them. Even a few families from Sweetwater interested in seeing the place that had defied the railroad. Hope grew rapidly, alert and curious, already trying to track movement with her eyes. She'd smile at Caleb's voice, settle immediately when Evelyn sang to her. Thomas and Jacob were devoted big brothers, constantly entertaining her, protective of her in ways that made Evelyn's heart swell. In late July, on an evening warm enough to sit outside after supper, they gathered on the porch, all 5 of them plus the ghost of Sarah, whose presence they'd learned to welcome rather than fear. Caleb held Hope while Evelyn leaned against his shoulder. The boys sat on the steps, watching fireflies begin their dance across the meadow. "Papa," Thomas said thoughtfully, "are we rich now, with all that railroad money?" "Not rich, but comfortable, secure." Caleb considered how to explain. "Money's a tool, not a goal. We have enough to build a good life, educate you boys, give Hope opportunities. That's what matters. Will we always live here? Do you want to?" Thomas looked around the valley, the cabin, the mountains, the creek, the endless sky. "Yeah, I like it here. It feels safe." "Then we'll stay. This is our home now, our forever place." Jacob turned around to face them. "Will you tell us stories about Sarah and your first wife? When we're older?" Caleb glanced at Evelyn, who nodded encouragement. "Yes," he said. "When you're ready to understand, I'll tell you everything. About Ayanna, about Sarah, about the life we had here before you came. Because they're part of our family too, and their stories deserve to be remembered." "Good," Jacob said, satisfied. "I want to know about them." That night, after the children were all asleep, Thomas and Jacob in the loft, Hope in her cradle, Caleb and Evelyn lay in bed, holding each other in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked quietly. "Answering that advertisement? Marrying a stranger? Coming to this wild place?" "Never, not once." She traced his jawline with her fingers. "Do you regret asking for a wife?" "Best decision I ever made. You saved my life, Evelyn. Not just practically, but fundamentally. You showed me how to live again. We saved each other. That's how love works. Mutual rescue, mutual healing." He pulled her closer. "I love you. More than I thought I could ever love anyone again. You and Hope and the boys, you're everything." "I love you too. My silent cowboy who turned out to be the bravest, kindest, most beautiful man I've ever known." They made love slowly, tenderly, celebrating the life they'd built from ashes and determination. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they slept deeply, the sleep of people who'd fought hard battles and earned their peace. The years that followed were good ones. Hope grew into a bright, curious toddler, then a spirited child who could climb trees and track animals by the time she was 5. Thomas became Caleb's right hand, learning ranching and woodcraft with natural skill. Jacob showed a gift for reading and numbers, devouring every book they could acquire and teaching himself advanced mathematics from borrowed texts. The school they'd funded in Sweetwater thrived, becoming a model for integrated education in the territory. Other communities began following their example, slowly breaking down barriers between white and native populations. Greyhawk visited regularly until his death when Hope was 7, always bringing wisdom and stories, always connecting them to Ayanna's heritage. Hope learned to speak basic Shoshone, to recognize traditional symbols, to understand she belonged to 2 worlds. The valley remained protected. The railroad's alternate route, a permanent reminder that some things were worth more than convenience or profit. Other families began settling nearby, respecting the Reed family's claim and the sacred ground it protected. Caleb built the second cradle when Hope was 8 and Evelyn was pregnant again, a boy this time, born healthy and loud in the spring of 1891. They named him Samuel Gray Reed, honoring the lawyer who'd fought for them and the grandfather who'd stood with them. The cabin expanded, rooms added as the family grew. The cedar cradle that had once held Sarah, then Hope, Then Samuel eventually held 3 more children over the years, each one rocked to sleep in the same lovingly crafted piece of furniture, connecting generations through wood and love. Thomas grew up to be a rancher, eventually taking over most of the property management. Jacob became a teacher, running the school they'd founded and expanding it into a full academy. Hope, strong-willed and brilliant, studied law and became an advocate for indigenous rights, carrying on the work her father and grandfather had started. Caleb and Evelyn grew old together in the valley they'd fought so hard to protect. They watched their children grow, their grandchildren arrive, the world change around them while their love remained constant. On a summer evening in 1923, 40 years after Evelyn had stepped off that stagecoach in Sweetwater, they sat together on the porch they'd repaired so many times. Both were silver-haired now, their bodies bearing the marks of hard lives well lived, but their hands still found each other naturally, fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked, echoing the question he'd asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Evelyn answered, as she always did. "You?" "Only that I wasted 10 years being alone when I could have been looking for you sooner." She laughed, the same bright sound that had first made him believe in happiness again. "We found each other when we were supposed to, not a moment before." "Maybe so." He lifted her hand, kissed her knuckles gently. "Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a broken cowboy nobody wanted. Thank you for being brave enough to ask, for letting me in when every instinct told you to stay closed." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We built something beautiful, Caleb. Look at it. Our children, our grandchildren, this valley protected for generations to come. This life we chose together. It's more than I ever dreamed possible. More than I deserved." "Exactly what you deserved. What we both deserved." She watched the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Love, family, belonging, purpose. Everyone deserves that. In the meadow below, their great-grandchildren played, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Inside the cabin, the cedar cradle sat in a place of honor, still beautiful after 40 years, still holding the weight of family history and hope for the future. The cowboy nobody wanted had become the man everyone respected, not through wealth or power, but through integrity, courage, and the quiet strength of living honorably. And the desperate widow from St. Louis had become the matriarch of a family that spanned cultures and generations, bound together by love that had survived every test. They sat together as darkness fell, two people who'd found each other in the ruins of their separate losses and built something whole. The valley stretched around them, protected and peaceful, a testament to the truth that some battles are worth fighting, some ground is worth defending, and some love is worth every sacrifice required to nurture it. Caleb Reed had finally come home, not to a place, but to a life, and in Evelyn's hand warm in his own, he held everything that mattered, everything that had ever mattered, everything that would continue to matter long after they were both gone. Buried beside Ayanna and Sarah under the pine trees, all of them together at last. The stars emerged one by one, bright in the mountain darkness, and beneath them, the family that had been built from hope, courage, and unyielding love settled in for another night in the valley they'd made their own. Home, forever home, earned, protected, and cherished beyond measure.